In this video, we're going to take a look at how to do sprite sheets in C# and XNA. I've already started a C# program. The name of it is Sprite Sheet 001, and I've got the template here. The only thing I've done so far, I've done two things. I've added this run file, which is a sprite sheet. We'll take a look at it in a minute, and I've deleted the comments over here to kind of unclutter the body of the program. So before you can use a sprite sheet, you need to know a little bit about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into paint.net here, and we're going to open up that file and take a look at what's in it. This is a file that I downloaded from some samples on the Microsoft website. Okay, we've got paint.net open now, and what I want to do is I want to go find that file. And it's out here on my SkyDrive folder. And there it is. Okay, now I'm going to blow this up a little bit here. Okay, and we'll move this out of the way. And if we look down here, we see that the image is 480 across and 48 pixels tall. And if you count up the images, there are 10 of them, so each image is 1/10 of 480 or 48. So our pictures are all square. They're 48 pixels by 48 pixels, and that's all I really need paint.net for. Now I can go back into the program and I can use that information to pick off these images. So let's close out of paint.net here. Let's go back in here. Now I need a variable to keep track of the size of that image, and to keep track of the size of something I need two numbers. We've used vector 2's before to keep track of two numbers, but a vector keeps track of two floating point numbers, and what we need is two integers. So we're going to take a look at another data type here. There's a built-in data type called point, and what it's used for is to locate a point on the screen. So it's an X and a Y coordinate, but it can also be used to store the size of an image. So we're going to store a width for the X value, and the Y value is going to be the height, and we're going to call this frame size, new point, and it's going to be 48 by 48. Okay. And you could make those constants in your program if you want to. Actually, we're just going to treat this point value as a constant right here. So we're going to refer to that. Anytime we need to refer to a frame in the image, we're going to refer to these two numbers right here to figure out how big the image is. Some other things we need to keep track of. We need to keep track of which frame we are currently on. We'll call that current frame. And the images in a sprite sheet are zero-based, just like pretty much everything else in C#. If you're dealing with an array, you start with 0. If you're dealing with string, the first character in the string is character 0. And the first image in a sprite sheet is image number 0. And we also need to keep track of how many frames we have. And we need to keep track of how many frames there are. We'll make that a constant. Whoops. Now we also need some variables to use for drawing the image. I'm going to be using one of the longer versions. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to use a structure, and we're using, I think it's version 6 of the draw method, which requires these 9 arguments. So we need a texture. That'll be our sprite sheet. Position is where we're going to put it on the screen. Source is something we haven't used before. Source is going to be the location on the sprite sheet of the image that we want to draw. In the past we've always drawn the entire image. Now we're just going to draw part of it, so this actually is something we're going to need. Color we'll just use white. Rotation we'll use 0. The origin we'll just use 0 for right now, which would make it the upper left hand corner of the picture. We'll leave the scale at 1, we'll leave the effect at none, and we'll leave layer depth at 0. So really the big thing that we need here that we didn't have before is the source. So we'll declare a sprite struct variable called sprite, and that's the one we're going to use to set all of these values for. So let's initialize those values. Let's go down here to initialize, and we'll get rid of this comment, and we'll set sprite dot we won't do the texture yet. We'll wait until load content for that. But position, where we want it to go on the screen, equals new vector 2 0, 0. Whoops. And the source is a rectangle. And we're going to start with the very first image on the sprite sheet, which is going to be location 0 for X, 0 for Y. And it's going to be, the width is going to be, let me see, frame size dot X, and the height is going to be frame size dot Y. Okay. And the color and the rotation and after rotation we're going to set the origin, and again, well, we're not going to do any rotating here, so it doesn't really matter where the rotation point is. So we'll just set that to 0, 0, and right now for the scale we'll just set that to 1. And sprite effects will be none, and the layer depth will be 0. Okay, so that takes care of everything except our image. Let's go down here and we'll load the image. And it's a texture 2D, and the name of it is run. Okay, now we can draw it. Let's go down here and put in our begin and end, and then we'll do a sprite batch.draw. And like I said, we want version 6 here, so I want sprite dot texture, and I named everything the same as it is here, so should be easy to do. So I want sprite dot position, sprite dot source, sprite dot color, sprite dot rotation, sprite.origin, sprite.scale, sprite.effect, comma, sprite.layerDepth. Okay. Okay, now let's run it. Now it doesn't do very much. All we're doing is showing the first frame over and over and over again. So let's go in and make a few changes. Okay. Now if we let me just put a few comments in here. The first item we get, or the first image we get, is going to be at 0, 0, and it's going to be 48 by 48. Okay. And the second one, the x coordinate is we need to move over 48 pixels. The y coordinate is still 0. We're starting at the top of that strip, and the size is going to be 48 by 48. Okay. If I go to the next one, it's going to be 96 pixels across. I'm still on 0 for the y coordinate because I'm starting at the top, and it's going to be 48 by 48. And you see what's happening here. If we add 48 onto that, what do we get? 144. So we can see that the only thing that's actually changing is the x coordinate. Everything else is going to be the same every time. So in update, if I want to move to the next frame, then I'm going to have to do frame count. Current frame plus. Okay. And then what I have to do is I have to change the source. So sprite.source. And the only thing I really need to change here is the x coordinate of the source equals current frame times, and then I've got the frame size dot the width, and there is no width, but there's an x coordinate. Okay. And that should get me to the next frame. This is going to happen pretty quickly here. We'll run it now. It's not going to do anything really very useful. It's going to run really quickly. And yeah, there are only 10 frames there. We went off at the end. And so after 10 frames, which would be 10/60ths of a second or 1/6 of a second, everything is gone. So what we want to do here is we want to make it repeat. So to make it repeat, what we have to do is after we increment the current frame, we got to see if we've gone off the end. So if current frame is equal to frame count, then I want to set current frame back to 0. Okay, so that should keep it repeating over and over and over again. Let's try this, but it's going to be really fast. Okay, but you can see that it's working. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to slow him down a little bit. So let's go up to the top here and let's try to make this easy to modify. So we'll have an int that's going to be, we'll call this ticks between frames. And right now we'll set it to 10. Okay. And then what we'll do here is we'll just have a timer variable. We'll call it frame timer to make it a little bit more clear. And at the beginning of the program, we will set frame timer equal to ticks between frames. Set it equal to 10. Okay. And then we're only going to do this business down here if let me see. We're going to do frame timer minus. Okay. And then if frame timer is down to 0, then we're going to do all this stuff, okay? But only if it gets down to 0. And when that happens, we also need to reset frame timer. So frame timer equals ticks between frames. Okay. Now let's try to run the program and see what happens this time. Okay, and he is running, and if we have our frame timer set at 10, we're going to be getting 6 frames per second. So about every 1 2/3 seconds, we're going to get, he's going to repeat. So if you just kind of follow his arms there, you can see that about, a little less than every 2 seconds, his arm is returning to the same spot. And now let's go back to the top of our program here, and because I made this, I didn't actually officially make it a constant, but it's serving as a constant for all practical purposes. I can just go up here and change this, and I can run the program again, and now he's going to be running twice as fast when I run the program this time. Okay. But he's still moving in place. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have him turn around and face the other direction. And that means I need to change my sprite effect. And I always get these confused, but I think it's flip horizontally. Let's run it here and see what happens. And we turned him around. Okay? And if we had done flip vertically, he'd be walking on the ceiling, but we'll leave it at that. And now let's make him walk across the screen. Okay, let's go back here and figure out how long we want it for him to take to get across the screen. So next, let's make this a float. So we'll give him 5 seconds to cross the screen, and then we need to figure out how much we need to move him on every tick. So before we do that, I'm going to set up a screen variable here, a rectangle. Oops. With the default size. And if I want to change my screen, I can always easily go up here and just change this variable. And we're going to make everything relative to our screen. So if we want 5 seconds to cross the screen, we need to do some calculations down here. Now, I'm not worried about how often the frames get updated. We're going to leave that the way it is. What I'm worried about now is moving this image across the screen. So I need to figure out how many pixels. I need another variable here. How many pixels per tick I need to move, and my pixels per tick is going to be, let me see, I've got 800 pixels I need to travel in 5 seconds. So let's take our screen dot width, which is 800, and divide it by the number of seconds to cross the screen, and that'll give us how many pixels we have to move per second. Okay, and I've got 60 ticks per second, so I need to divide that by 60. Okay, and I think I made something a float up here, seconds to cross screen. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to get a float for result here. So I'm going to take this whole thing and convert it into an int when I'm all done. Okay, and now pixels per tick. What I'm going to have to do down here is, this is every tick of the clock, so I don't need this inside of an if statement. Let's put it above this, so let's keep this code together. And what I want to do now is I want to change his location. Okay, and that's going to be his position on the screen. So sprite, oops, before we, sprite dot position dot x plus equals pixels per tick. Okay, you could also call that speed or something like that if you wanted to. And now let's run the program and see if it takes him 5 seconds to run across the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Looks like it might have been a little bit slow, but there's going to be a problem here because we're using integers, and we have to use integers if we're dealing with pixels. If I take on 800 here, and let's just calculate that out. If I take 800 and divide it by 5, I'm going to get 160 pixels, and if I divide that by 60, 160 divided by 60 using integers is going to be the number 2. So, and it's actually closer to 3. So I'm going to move him 2 pixels per tick, and if let me see, if I multiply that by 60, I'm going to get 120 pixels per second, and that'd be 140, 240, 360, 480, 600, 720. It's actually going to take more than, it's going to take about 6.5 seconds for him to move across the screen. And that's just a problem with using integers like that. You know, what we could do is we could round it off. There's some other ways you can do it and keep track of it much more precisely, but we're not going to get into that right now. So that's what's involved in using a one-dimensional sprite sheet. You need to know how big the individual images are, and you need to know how many there are, and from that point on, it's just a matter of calculating what the source is going to be, and then using the long version of the draw method down here to draw your sprite on the screen. And in the next video, we'll take a look at doing two-dimensional sprite sheets.